Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we're very excited to be hosting Senator Tim Kaine, who's here to talk about his new book, Walk, Ride, Paddle, A Life Outside. Senator Kaine, a Virginia Democrat, of course, has served in the Senate since 2013. He's also been mayor of Richmond and lieutenant governor and governor of Virginia. In fact, as noted in a brief bio on the inside of his book cover, he's only one of 30 people in U.S. history to have been a mayor, governor, and U.S. senator. And oh, by the way, he was Hillary Clinton's vice presidential running mate in the 2016 election. So what's he doing now with a book, Walk, Ride, Paddle? That sounds very outdoorsy. Well, back in 2018, when he turned 60 and passed his 25th year in public office, the senator decided to embark on a series of journeys across his state, hiking all 559 miles of the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, from Harper's Ferry to the Tennessee border, biking 321 miles in Virginia along the Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive, and canoeing 348 miles on the James River from the Allegheny Mountains to the Chesapeake Bay. The senator dubbed this the Virginia Nature Triathlon, and he did one part each year for 3 years during weekends and Senate recess weeks. He chronicled the experience as he went, writing about not only what he saw and who he talked to, but also reflecting on what was going on elsewhere at the time. And those years, 2019, 2020, and 2021, were, as I'm sure you all recall, marked by some extraordinary circumstances: 2 presidential impeachment trials, a global pandemic, racial protests, the January 6th attack on the Capitol. As the senator writes, when he conceived of this multi-part adventure, it was with the idea of celebrating the past and finding fresh motivation for the future. But the journeys turned out to be equally about the present, which he reflects a lot on in the journal. And while long stretches were done alone, the senator was joined at many points by family and friends, which gave rise to some great conversations and to the renewing of those relationships. In the end, Senator Kaine himself emerged reinvigorated and refocused, which is an especially good thing for him, not least because after 12 years in the Senate, he's running again. He's running for re-election this November. Just kicked off his re-election campaign, I think, earlier this month. And we as readers, in turn, have ended up with an engaging, thoughtful, and revealing journal to enjoy. In conversation with the senator this evening will be his editor, Austin Ross, who is a senior editor with HarperCollins and worked on the book with the senator. Austin has edited some nonfiction, some fiction as well as nonfiction during his career, and he's also written himself. His debut novel, Gloria Patri, a literary thriller, was published last August, and his short fiction and essays have appeared in a number of publications. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Senator Tim Kaine and Austin Ross.
Hey, everyone. Good evening. Well, thank you all so much for coming out. We're thrilled that you have braved, well, it was supposed to be stormy. It's not really stormy now, but thanks for coming out. So my name's Austin Ross. I am an editor with HarperCollins. Some of you were probably wondering, who is Tim talking to up here? I had the privilege, the joy of working with Tim on this book. And just as a way of introduction, Tim made my job very easy. Tim's a great guy to work with, one of the nicest people you could probably imagine. But if you're unfamiliar with nonfiction publishing, typically what happens is we get what's called a book proposal, which is 50 or 60 pages that outlines what the book could be. So chapter outline, some sample chapters, marketing outline, those sorts of things. But Tim had already written the whole book. And so I was like, okay, well, this makes my job fairly easy. But no, it was a joy and a thrill to work with him on this book. And I thought that as a way to kick off, both to introduce the book itself and to kick off our conversation, I thought it'd be great to have Tim just read the prologue. It's short. We'll take a couple minutes, but you can borrow my copy. So, yeah.
Prologue 2023. This book is an account of 3 journeys I undertook deep into Virginia nature from May 2019 through October 2021. I planned the multi-year experience in 2018 to commemorate turning 60 and reaching 25 years in public life. What I didn't know when I hatched the plan was that the adventure would coincide with 2 impeachment trials, a pandemic killing more than 1 million people in the United States and causing global economic meltdown, a violent attack on the Capitol with the intent to overturn the 2020 presidential election, and racial justice protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd and others. As a senator, I was in the middle of all of it. I kept a journal each of the 76 days I was hiking, cycling, and canoeing across Virginia. Afterward, I added notes on each trip and planned the next portion. Each chapter is about the day's journey, the history, both human and natural, of the places I traversed, conversations with companions and passersby, memories of earlier trips, and thoughts occurring to me along the way. The journal became an organic reflection of the extraordinary events occurring in America during the years of the journey. That daily turmoil filled my thoughts and came to play a larger role in the narrative than I would have predicted when I began. But the time in Virginia's wilderness also proved a balm for the chaos I was living. Along the way, I've learned much about Virginia, America, nature, other people, and myself. I've resisted the temptation to revise sections of the journal based on what I now know about how these events played out. Instead, this is a real-time reflection of how I experienced these events with only the knowledge I had at the moment, never sure what I would see around the next bend. Even now, more than at any time in my life, I'm not sure what I will see around the next bend.
Thank you. Yes. So I'd love to open by hearing kind of from your perspective of at what point did the impetus for this book, as kind of commemorating your 60th birthday, your 25th year in public office, at what point did it shift from being you're just on this journey to you're writing a book? And sort of the transition from maybe keeping journal entries into, oh, this has potential to become something else. And then what was the process like of turning it into a book, finding an agent, a publisher, and all those sorts of things?
And I want to say, this guy's a fantastic editor. He's a great editor.
I'll send you the check later. No, I'm kidding.
So, I mean, kind of as I described, I like to mark milestones. I bet a lot of people here like to mark milestones. So turning 60 in my election year in 2018, that's a milestone. But I can't really do anything because I got to work on my election. But next year, 2019, I celebrate 25 years in public life. So during the campaign, I was like, next year, win or lose, I'm going to be doing something really fun. But I didn't know what it would be. The election's over. It's maybe Thanksgiving 2018. And this idea just kind of springs into my head. Do this, create a Virginia nature epic quest. Some of you, if you're from New York, there's a thing in New York called the 46ers. There's 46 peaks in the Adirondacks higher than 4,000 feet. And families will embark on trying to do this in their life. And Colorado has a similar thing. Iowa has a bike ride across Iowa. So I just kind of decided the way I'll mark this milestone is to create a Virginia version, create a Virginia quest. So first, it was just a quest. But then I thought, well, if I do it and write it up, maybe I can kind of brand it as this Virginia quest, the Virginia Nature Triathlon is what I call it, and maybe encourage others to do it too. And then I started to think about great books about travel. so many great travel books are about places that you may never see. You know, you read about somebody climbing Everest, you may never see it, but you still enjoy hearing that story. But then the other genre of travel that I like is George O'Keeffe has this painting From the Far Away Nearby. There's travel literature about things really close at hand that you never explored. And so I kind of use that From the Far Away Nearby as a motivator. And each day I was writing 100 words up at the end of the day, but probably, you know, into maybe 2/3 of the way into the hike, I thought, maybe if I write this, you know, UVA Press will publish it or something. It's a very Virginia book. I mean, it's a very Virginia book. Why would anyone be interested in it unless you want to do Virginia journeys? But then at some point later, Austin, what I realized is, wow, you know, I started before all of this turmoil, and the 30 months of the journey were all of those things that I mentioned, and it ended up being a nature journey, but the nature journey was the lens through which I was looking at and trying to understand and make sense of all these events happening in our country during those 30 months. And then you asked about the process of the writing. Can I tell you something about being a senator? Every night you go home by yourself. My wife Ann and I, Ann's right here, we live in Richmond, 36 weeks a year. We're in the Senate in D.C. You have your vote. Maybe you have an event. Then you go home. And most often, you're going home by yourself. And, okay, I've been in the Senate 11 years now. I can turn on a basketball game every night. Next night, next night, next night. You know, after a while, it's like, is that all there is? And the writing ended up being amazing because I would do the trip, like the hike, you know, a little bit spring, a little bit summer, a little bit fall. And then the bike trip started the next summer. So in that in the interstices, in the winter between the trips, I would like, okay, I'll go home. Last vote. I'm going to sit down at my kitchen table. I'm going to write up day 6 today. And then I would find myself 2 hours later with a big smile on my face. I had just relived everything great about day 6 without sweating. You know, like when I did it, I had to sweat. But now I'm just sitting there with a smile on my face, thinking about the places, thinking about the people, thinking about animals or bird sounds or nature's beauty. And so it turned out to be the writing was a wonderful way to deal with, you know, most of us when we're here, we are sitting by ourselves every night, like, okay, what do I do?
It's great. Yeah, one of the things that I loved reading about it was I didn't actually have to do the entire journey with you, but it felt like I did. So there's an immediacy to it, right? One of the things that I really fell in love with when I first read this book is that it's very clear when you read it that you are steeped in reading and literature, that reading is a big part of your life. So I would love to hear from you, like, what are some kind of the role that reading continues to play, has played in your life? What are some authors or some books that you return to again and again for inspiration? Yeah, those sorts of things, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm a reading fanatic. I try to read everything. But I read things that are not connected to work. So, you know, I use reading now. Maybe I used reading different and earlier in my life. I use reading now to get outside of work and learn about other people or other things or get a respite from whatever tense issue that I'm trying to grapple with. And so fiction, nonfiction, poetry, plays, you know, the New York Review of Books, that's like the thing that we read all the time. The book I'm reading right now is Father James Martin, who's a Jesuit priest, has written a really great book recently called "Come Forth" about interpretations of the Lazarus story in the Gospel of John in the New Testament. And so just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it really is to you know, decompress or get outside myself and gain some sense of perspective. My wife Ann is in a book club that's now how many years, honey? 33 or 30 years as a book club. So, you know, she does it, and it's for the same reasons, but also maybe a little bit more as a social connector. And man, and can I tell you the best perk about being in the United States Senate? Every book that has ever been published in the United States is at the Library of Congress. And when I came into the Senate, I realized there are books that I've wanted to read, but that I never could find. I never could find it. There's a book that was written by somebody early in the days of the Spanish conquest of the Incas, who wrote a book in a weird mixture of Spanish and Quechua with his own drawings. Well, I've never been able to read that book, and I've always wanted to. And it took me about a year and a half into the Senate to realize I can call the Library of Congress, can I have this book? And it will be on my desk the next day. And I will look and see that no one has ever checked this out. It's completely unpopular. And I never take it away from DC because I don't want to be like the guy that loses it, and who knows what the fine structure is at the Library of Congress. But that is a cool thing about being in the Senate, is any book that you can't find anywhere, you can ask for and it'll be on your desk the next day.
Man, I think you just convinced a lot of people to run for Senate. So need to find those books. The book is filled with all kinds of wonderful, sometimes kind of crazy stories of you out on the trail, on this bike ride on the river. So if there are maybe one or two favorite memories, or maybe least favorite memories, you can interpret it however you want, what would come to mind as the standout moments?
So maybe Rorschach, I'll give you my favorite and my least favorite. The ones that just jump to mind. So it's probably my third day on the trail, which is the first of the 3 segments. And it is a really, it has rained the day before, and it's really slow going because the trail is really muddy. So I hiked the AT from Harpers Ferry south. So if any of you have done that, kind of up near maybe like Route 7 and kind of up in there. And I'm hiking south, and I'm climbing up a long set of switchbacks. Very foggy still, trail's really muddy. And I hear speakers, people are hiking down, and I realize they're speaking Arabic. So, okay, that's interesting. So when we get to the place where they are passing me, we're going the opposite direction. A group of about 7 or 8 guys passed me. And the last one says, Senator Kaine. Now I'm wearing, hiking shorts and haven't shaved and a T-shirt. Senator Kaine. Yeah, no, I'm Senator Kaine. Your staff just yesterday called and told me that you've helped get my mother out of a refugee camp in Jordan, and she's going to come join us. Syrian refugee during the Syrian civil war, had come across the border into Jordan and had been waiting, elderly mom. And my staff had been working on it. The Senate staff, you do all this constituent service stuff. And I wonder, I have some staffers here who are just so good at this. But I mean, literally the call had just been made to this guy 12 hours before. And he had never met me anywhere. He'd been working with my staff, but all of a sudden, he sees me in hiking shorts and gets to say thank you. And it was like, I do not believe in coincidences. I never have been. And so we had this wonderful visit. And I said, so what's up with this group? Oh, we're the Syrian American Dentist Hiking Group, Okay, well, the Syrian American Dentist Hiking Group. That's great. My least favorite was on the river. And anybody know what a JetBoil stove is? JetBoil stove. Okay, we got some. So a JetBoil stove is a fantastic piece of technology for camping with a fuel canister and a kind of a stove element you screw on top of the fuel canister, and then a contained, 30-ounce thing of water with a cap on it, and it will boil 30 ounces of water in 90 seconds. So on the trail, a JetBoil stove is a great thing to have. I'm canoeing, and we're camping at Powhatan State Park, which is west of Richmond, and it's 3 neighbors and I, and we're, making our way down the river, and I'm like the breakfast maker. So we wake up in our tents, and it's horrible weather, and then we decide, okay, we're going to go to one of these picnic shelters before we canoe, and we do. And I'm making the hot water for coffee, and we're talking about the day and shooting the breeze about this and that. And as I'm making the water for coffee, I do not snap the lid down tight on top of the canister. So I've boiled 30 ounces of water in 90 seconds, and I take the first cup to fill up the water, and I'm standing there with rubber Crocs on my feet, and they're kind of like river Crocs. And when I pour the first cup, all the 30 ounces goes onto my left foot. Horrible. It ends up 2nd and 3rd degree burns on my left foot. And my first reaction was, I had at least this presence of mind: I don't want that rubber to melt to my foot. So it was very hard to make myself reach down and rip the Croc off, but I did. And then with friends, you try to be more macho than you are. So I'm like, oh, sorry, guys, here, I'm going to make more water for coffee. And I'll need a little more time, but, we'll be back out on the river. These three friends are neighbors, and they are great friends, been friends forever. And they immediately knew, you ain't getting back on the river. Because they were looking at my foot when I was not wanting to do it. They could see how bad the burn was. You're not getting back on the river. You're in shock right now, but when that wears off, the pain is going to be intense. And you don't want to get a foot infected. I mean, a burn can get infected. The James River's a lot of sewage in it, So I did relight the stove, and I made him a cup of coffee, but then about 30 minutes later, the pain just hit like a freight train. And I was like, no, I can't do it. But the thing about good friends, they knew I couldn't do it, but they were going to let me make that decision for myself. So that's my least favorite.
Well, that segues beautifully into my next question, which was going to be about lessons you've learned along the way. Number one being, don't pour boiling water on your foot. But I'm just curious, what lessons did you learn along the way, and how have those lessons kind of shaped you going forward, or how do you see them shaping you going forward as a person, as a politician, however you want to take that question?
Boy, that's a kind of another Rorschach thing. So maybe one that's very rooted in the camping experience, and then one that's a bigger life lesson as I was contemplating what was going on in the country. So a camping lesson that I learned as I was doing this journey, and I learned this on day 2. I had a plan. I'm going to do 17 miles this day, 15 miles this day. I did too many miles the first day because I hadn't hiked with a 30-pound pack for quite a while. And I fell twice at the end of this, and the rain was bad, and the falls weren't bad, but it's like, So the next day I had this plan of getting to this place, and I don't know, it was 15 or 16 miles. And at about mile 13, I got to the most beautiful shelter that's sitting right at the confluence of these two little creeks. And it was like, man, this place is perfect. This would be the perfect place to camp. Oh no, but I need to make 3.5 more miles today. And I suddenly realized, no, I don't. Like, who cares? I mean, I'm not trying to set a speed record. If I do this, and I doubted every day that I could do it until about mile 300 on the hike. I kept thinking, well, why do I have to do this? Day hikes are fine. I mean, but that day I realized, walk when I want, sleep when I want, walk when I want, rest when I want, sleep when I want. Start walking when I want, and if I want to rest, do it. And when I want to stop, do it. And as soon as I realized that, then I let go of the plan. I got to be here. I got to be here. I got to be here. No, I just got to walk when I want, rest when I want, sleep when I want. And that has had a carryover a little bit into life. Don't, what do you mean you have to do this? No, just do what feels right. When you're ready to stop, stop. The lesson that might be a little more of a meta one was, I remember a day when I'm hiking. Anybody ever been to Mount Rogers, highest peak in Virginia? It's like 5,700 feet. And Mount Rogers is named after a Virginian who had all this geological surveys of the Appalachians. He ended up being the founding president of MIT. Highest mountain named after him, down in Grayson County. And I'm going to be hiking up Mount Rogers this day, and it's in October, and it's really rainy, and it's really foggy. The House has just embarked upon the impeachment inquiry, and it's clear I'm going to be a juror for the first time in my life. I've never even been a juror in like traffic court. It doesn't end up landing on us till January or February, but it's clear that day this is going to be something we're going to have to grapple with. And that whole day I was hiking by myself in the fall to get to this really cool shelter right up near Mount Rogers. And I was just trying to think, like, how do I understand this moment? How do I understand a moment, impeachment and then later COVID and all of these things? And, what I found myself thinking about on this very long day was the book of Job. And I talk about this a little bit. The book of Job was written 2,500 years ago, and it's in the Quran and the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. So it's a story that it's lasted because it says something. And it's a story about, why does suffering happen? And, Job is a guy who is a good person, who's a faithful person, and things are going well for him. Then he starts to lose everything. His question is the universe pointless? Do bad things happen just like for no reason? he has friends that look at him and see that he's losing stuff. And they say, well, we thought Job was a good guy, but because he's losing stuff, he must be being punished for things he did wrong that we don't know about. So the reader is confronted with these two interpretations of why bad things happen. The universe is pointless, or bad things happen because you deserve bad things to happen. But the reader knows neither of those are true. The reader of the story knows that I mean, we got to admit it's a little bit cruel, that God and the devil are testing him. And they're testing him to see, the devil says, oh, he's only a faithful guy because he has everything. If he loses everything, he won't be faithful anymore. So let's test him and put him through trials and tribulations and see how faithful he is. And he argues with God. He's like furious about it, but he doesn't let go of his principles. And so the third interpretation of challenging times, and if it's true for a person, it could be true for a society, is maybe it's a test. It doesn't have to be pointless, and it doesn't have to be a punishment, but maybe it's a test. And I found that thought, which I kind of kept walking with and then cycling with and then riding with through all these, maybe it's a test. And, my view is it's a test that we're surviving but not yet passing. Whether we pass or not is TBD, but that became was a somewhat comforting way to think about challenges, that they don't have to be punishment and they don't have to be pointless. Those would be depressing if you thought about adversity and it was either punishment or pointless. But the notion that it's a test and that it's up to us to, hopefully persist and carry on and pass the test, that I found that comforting.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And again, we didn't actually go over these questions, but it segues into my next question really well. Because one of the things another thing that I really fell in love with this book is that it's very clear that you are an inherently optimistic person.
Yeah.
About many different things, but kind of the foremost in my mind was the future of America, because I think we're at a time now where optimism in the future, generally, optimism in the future of America is kind of at a premium in many ways. And so I'm curious, as we're kind of preparing to end this evening, what are some things that you find that keep you going in retaining some of that realistic optimism? It's not an optimism that, Tim's not an unrealistic optimist. He's facing very serious things head on and is well aware of them. But I think, what are some things that keep you going in your optimism, and then what are some things or some ways that we can foster optimism in our own lives?
I don't think I tell this story in the book, but I'm going to tell a story about my mother, Kathy. So my mom and dad, Al and Kathy, they're 89, grew up in Kansas City. My dad ran a welding and ironworking shop. My mom, home ec teacher, then homemaker, and then worked with and for my dad in the ironworking shop. And once my mom heard me say something kind of negative and snarky like teenage boys do, and she goes, "Hey, listen, and let me give you a little life advice." All right. You have to decide in life whether you would rather be right or do right. Now, if you want to be right, be a pessimist, because events will frequently prove you right. But if you'd rather do right, then be an optimist, because optimism has a way of shaping events sometimes in a positive direction. And that was such good advice. And so, and her advice was, even when there's no evidence to suggest being optimistic, you should still do it. And what I found that to be so true, and I kind of absorbed that in my thinking. Optimism can shape events in a positive direction. I mean, you all work with people, pessimists, optimists, and I think you can see that optimism can shape life in a positive direction. And even when it's not shaping your efforts, it's not helping you find what the positive answer is, as soon as you're pessimistic, you're not as good a listener as to the solution that somebody else puts on the table. And a lot of the solutions that are out there for our biggest problems are not solutions that I have. They're solutions that young people have, or solutions that people have that, might not be office holders, might not, have a title in front of their name, but they have a solution. Well, if I walk into a situation pessimistic about that there's a resolution to this, then I'm probably not going to be as good a listener. And when I hear somebody say something like, wow, that I never thought of it that way, but that might be the answer to this. And so I think being an optimist is it's sort of faith-based rather than evidence-based, but it's also the frame of mind that keeps your aperture open so that you can see or hear or understand or find a solution that isn't your solution, but that's somebody else's solution that really is the solution. And then in terms of optimism for society, my whole, gauge of optimism is how engaged young people are. For this reason, my own upbringing. I'm 5 years old. I come home from kindergarten and my mother's crying in front of the TV because JFK's been assassinated. I've never seen my mother cry before. And then I am 10 years old and I pick up the newspaper and Martin Luther King has been assassinated. And then a few months later, Bobby's been assassinated. And then the Vietnam War protests and civil rights protests and the Democratic Convention and a president resigning in disgrace. My formation from age 5 to 16 was a formation that basically convinced me adults had completely screwed the world up. And I think a lot of young people feel that today too. But my formation was also, but young people were marching for civil rights and some laws got passed. And young people were marching against the Vietnam War and they chased a president out and the war ended. And then young people organized with others and got the right to vote at age 18 rather than 21. And so what I learned in my formative period was, man, a lot of bad stuff is happening. But when young people engaged, they helped solve some of these bad things, and then they paved a way to a better chapter. And so the engagement of young people, to me, is like the barometer. I don't know, is the barometer the right word? Or it's kind of like the bit of evidence about whether, hey, if young people engage, they got ideas that I don't have, and then things are going to go better. Not like every young person's idea is great or every old person's idea isn't good, but just on kind of in the law of averages, when young people engage, then things go better. And then when you see societies do things where, like, I was thinking about Brexit not long ago. The Brexit vote was to leave, but the young vote said, no, stay. When societies make decisions that are dramatically contrary to the wishes of young people, then usually that is an evidence of an incongruity that has to be righted, the tectonic plates have to shift and put it back in balance.
Yeah. So just reminding ourselves kind of things to be optimistic about. I'm just curious, before we move into the Q&A, this question popped in my head as I was preparing. There may not be an answer to it, there may be. But is there a question that you've always wanted to be asked but haven't been asked? You're like, I wish this person would ask me this question.
Wow.
It's going to make my job easier again, right? But maybe there isn't.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No,
Okay.
no, I can't think of one.
All right.
I am in a line of work where I get a lot of questions. So
Right.
if I wasn't in a line of work where I got a lot of questions, I might have questions I wish had been asked, but most of them.
All right. Well, let's move over to the Q&A then. So we have some questions from the audience. I like this question a lot. What are you most proud of in representing the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm proud of the arc that Virginia is on, that I've been able to play my little part in. I moved to Virginia in 1984. I'm a Kansas City kid. My wife's a Virginian. She's more persuasive. So I remember loading our car up in Kansas City and driving 1,100 miles to Richmond in August of 1984, presidential year. And we crossed the border, and it's about 200 miles in where I say, how come nobody's got a Democratic bumper sticker on? The Virginia that I moved into, and I could be objective about it because I hadn't spent any time here. It was not that socially welcoming. It was not that economically dynamic. It was not that focused on education. It was not that politically competitive, certainly not in presidential years. Virginia kind of went red after Harry Truman in 48 with the singular exception of the LBJ election in 64. And what I have seen, and we've played our little part in it, is it's a state that's more welcoming. It's a state that's more politically progressive. It's a state that is more economically dynamic. It's a state that is more focused on education. When I was born, 1 out of 100 Virginians had been born in another country. Today, 1 out of 8 Virginians is born in another country. And we've gone from bottom quarter per capita income to top quarter per capita income. Don't tell me immigration is, a net negative. No, immigration for Virginia has been this big positive. Now, there's nothing we're doing that we can't do a whole lot better, so there's no room for complacency or feeling like we've hit a plateau or something. But the thing that I'm proudest of is that I played my little part in what I consider kind of a positive turnaround project for a state that there's a really wonderful book, I can't remember the name of the author, called Dominion of Memories, and the book poses this question: why did Virginia produce all the first presidents and vice presidents and have a golden era between 1776 and the 1830s, and then have kind of a long eclipse in terms of its impact on national politics? The reason: slavery, Civil War, massive resistance, Jim Crow, all of those things. But I kind of feel like in the last bit of time, Virginia has moved back into a place where we are, we're on a good arc. And to have played a little part in that is the thing, that's the thing that I'm proud of.
That's good. All right, the next one says, "Hi, Senator Kaine. How did you find / make time with your hectic schedule to continue your outdoor hobbies?" So maybe talk about how you wrote the book. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Senate schedule is 36 weeks a year in D.C., but then you have recess weeks, and you're going to have family vacation and take time off for Christmas. But in the recess weeks, we are supposed to be going around Virginia, interacting with Virginians. Now, yes, usually in a car with a suit on, but I kind of reasoned, well, look, I mean, what am I going to do during a recess week? I think I can do a Senate recess week all people powered. And instead of doing it with a press crew and a staff and having it all scheduled, I can do it during recess weeks and just run into the people I run into. I mean, I had so many weird, funny chance interactions with people who didn't know who I was, who knew who I was but didn't let on that they know who I was, but overwhelmingly who didn't know who I was. On the trail, some of you know, you take a trail name. You don't introduce yourself by your name. You introduce yourself by a trail name, and that's kind of a democratizing things along with the shorts and smelling bad and stuff like that. We're all the same out on the trail. You can't pick your own trail name. Somebody has to give you the trail name, and it's usually given based on something stupid or funny that you've done. My trail name is Dog Bowl. It's a great trail name. It's a great trail name. I did meet somebody once who introduced himself as Achilles, and I said, "Great trail name." He goes, "What do you mean trail name?" Achilles is my name. It's like, what parent would think Achilles was a good name? Anyway, I did this during Senate recess weeks and weekends, and so it was my way of, diving deep into Virginia and interacting with Virginians, but just not doing it in the normal way.
That's great. Next question is, can you talk a little bit about trail magic on the AT, and have you left gifts?
Anybody know? Raise your hand if you know what trail magic is, right? Okay, so good. We got a bunch of people who do. So trail magic is the unexpected moment of grace that you didn't expect, and then there it was. I'm hiking. My son Nat is sitting here, and he and I did some hiking together. But one day I was hiking with his sister, Anella, down near a really amazing place called Burke's Garden in Tazewell County. But it was August. It was really hot. And that particular summer of 2019, water was almost non-existent. And, man, what a gut punch. You're hiking. Like, I know this stream. It's 2 miles away. It's a mile away. It's a half mile away. Get to the stream, just dust. Get to the spring, not even running. And we were in a stretch where the water was really bad. And I remember my daughter and I, we had to hike 16 miles to a place where there was no water, and then another 8 miles the next day to a place where there might be water. And we each have 2 liters of water. And so we're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a liter of water for 16 miles in 90 degrees. And then we'll have a liter of water for our meal and the 8 miles tomorrow. Of course, that was impossible. We were gulping down water like there was no tomorrow. We get halfway through the 16 miles, 1 liter bottle gone, second bottle down to next to nothing. We cross a dirt road that is coming over the mountain and dropping down into this beautiful valley, Burke's Garden. Full case of bottled water that somebody has just left right there. And when I needed it at that moment more than I needed it any time during the entire 42 days. It's just sitting right there. And so that's trail magic. What did I offer trail magic? Maybe it's not like so accidental, but I'm in a shelter one night down near kind of the Priest. It's called the Woodworth Sealy Shelter. The Priest is a really amazing climb down off the Tye River. And I'm in a shelter that I've had a really hard day hiking. And I'm basically there. I've had dinner. I'm about to fall asleep. And I hear this trudging set of footsteps coming up. I mean, it is almost dark, but I hear this trudging set of footsteps. And a guy rounds the corner, and he has clearly had a tough day. Boxcar Willing is his trail name. I later find out he's a retired Utah wildlife resources guy who, even though he spent his entire life in the outdoors in the West, where there are beautiful mountains, always wanted to hike the AT. He's had a hard day. He trudges in and he goes, "Hey, I'm Boxcar Willing. I'm Dog Bowl. Do you, I've run out of fuel. I don't have anything to cook dinner with." And I mean, I was on the verge of falling asleep and I didn't really want to. All right. Okay. Well, so I get my fuel out and I get my JetBoil fired up, and no accident this time. And I cook the water for his dinner. And then he's doing this like, "So what do you do?" "Well, I work in Washington." "Well, like what? Well, I'm a lawyer." "Well, you work for a law firm?" "No." "Well, who do you work with?" "I work for the government." "Well, what agency?" All right. "I'm a U.S. Senator." "Really? Tell me about Mitt Romney. Tell me about Mike Lee. I mean, what are they really like?" And so, anyway, I guess that was my trail magic, is cooking dinner for Boxcar Willing.
Can you tell us about Mitt Romney, though? No. All right, the next one is, as a newcomer to Virginia from California and an avid hiker, what is your recommendation for a must-see 10-mile day hike anywhere in the state?
Oh, my gosh. Okay. 10-mile day hike anytime in the state. So I'm going to give you a close, a medium, and a far. So I'm going to give you a close. Sky Meadows State Park out in kind of Fauquier County. So we've got some Sky Meadows fans. And basically, there's a trail that you hike up. You get to the trailhead. It's on Route 17 in Fauquier County. And you hike kind of generally southwest up to the Blue Ridge. And then the AT is on top. So you hike up a trail, and then you turn right on the AT, and you hike north for a couple miles, and then you get to something called the Ambassador Whitehouse Trail. Sheldon Whitehouse, my Senate colleague from Rhode Island, his dad, Charlie Whitehouse, grew up there, and they named the trail after him. So you can do it's probably a 7 or 8 miler, but it's, a state park trail, the AT north, and then a state park trail back to your car. That's a great loop hike. Look, medium, Old Rag. I mean, anybody hiked Old Rag? Yay. So it's down near Sperryville. So what county would that be? That's like Rappahannock. Rappahannock? Is it southern Fauquier, Rappahannock, kind of right down there? Sperryville, Virginia. And it is an absolutely beautiful trail. You don't want to hike it on a weekend because it gets too crowded. So find an off day. And you basically hike up, and it's a scramble. You have to like clamber over rocks and have friends willing to, grab your ass and push up. I mean, you got to hike with some people but then you get to the top, and then there's a back way down on a fire road. But it's a beautiful, probably 11 or 12 mile hike. And then I'll give you my far one. I would say if you can ever get down to Mount Rogers, it's a long way to go down. You basically go down to about Marion, Virginia, get off Interstate 81, and you get there. And there's a couple of different ways to climb Mount Rogers. Probably the best way is to go to Grayson Highlands State Park and set up there, tent there, and then upping and backing from Mount Rogers is, 8 to 10 miles. Or there's also some National Forest Service campgrounds to the north of Mount Rogers where you can camp and hike it, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And the park is really cool because there's a lot of wild ponies there, wild horses that used to be used as kind of grazing grounds, and then these horses have kind of, their descendants are there, but they're aggressive though. Don't feed them because they'll bite your hand if you try to give them a carrot or an apple, but they're very cool and it's a beautiful place. So those would be 3.
This one intrigued me. I'm curious how you would take this question. What place out in wild nature most reminds you of being in the Senate chamber. So that could be good or bad.
Oh my gosh.
Like the time I poured boiling water on my foot, that really reminds me of it.
Great Dismal Swamp. Mhm. That just came to my mind, and I don't know whether it says something about the Senate, but anybody ever been in Great Dismal Swamp? Okay, so it's a swamp. It's one of only 2 natural lakes in Virginia, Lake Drummond, and it's a swamp down in southeast Virginia near Chesapeake, and it's just massive. It was maybe 1 million square acres. It's been carved away, and it's it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service nature preserve. Great migratory bird area, but it's also got an amazing history. So it's a swamp where there are a lot of very low-lying, like 2 or 3 acre hills, like 2-foot high hills that are barely out of the swamp. And tribes, the Nansemond tribe, when they were engaged in battles with English settlers, a lot of them moved into the swamp to live. And a lot of escaped slaves would move into the swamp to live. And the name that either they were bestowed, but the name bestowed upon them or that they used for themselves was Maroons, because they were kind of marooned in the middle of this. But that also meant that they would be free. And in the Civil War, groups were going in. Harriet Beecher Stowe, after she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, her next book was about communities in Great Dismal Swamp. And it is truly, you can get into it with a canoe, and it's superb during April and May because of migratory birds. So, yeah, boy, don't tell my Senate colleagues when you asked me that question, I said Great Dismal Swamp.
I'm going to jump in with a couple more questions here as we move towards closing. But I would be curious to hear you talk a little bit more. I watched the event that you did with Cory Booker for the 92nd Street Y, and there was part of that I found very moving, which is where you both talk about the role that faith has played in your life. You talk about it in the book, but not necessarily just faith, but the idea maybe of a foundation in your life and what role that's played in your life. Would love to hear you share a little bit more about that.
I grew up in a very Irish Catholic household, and we... my parents were so regular about Sunday Mass that, if we got back from a vacation at 7:30 p.m., I see a buddy, Eric, from Kansas City over here, grew up in Kansas City. We'd get back at 7:30 on a Sunday night, and the 3 boys were like, great, we don't have to go to Mass. My parents would know that one church had an 8 p.m. Mass on Sunday night in Kansas City. So this was a very much, oh, man, we got to do this. But it created a storehouse of scripture and song. So I have quite a good memory, but I know so much scripture from having heard it read. I will say I remember 0 sermons I ever heard. Catholic priests are not known for being the best sermonizers, but the scripture itself, Old Testament, New Testament, I know very, very well. And I just lean on it all the time. In fact, I leaned on it trying to decide whether to run for the Senate again. I was trying to, 30 years in public life. Okay, do I open a new chapter? Do I continue the existing chapter? And there are pluses and minuses, but I don't want it to be a mathematical exercise. I don't want to say 51% says, okay, I'm going to do this. So after I thought about it all, I just said, well, listen, I'm going to assign a scripture verse to the proposition that I should, instead of continuing, I should open a new chapter in life. For everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Old Testament wisdom, it's written thousands of years ago. It's very true. Then I'm going to assign a verse to the, why don't I run again? Galatians, do not grow weary in doing good, for you'll reap a great harvest if you don't give up. Then instead of thinking about any pro and con, and not even thinking about myself or the Senate, I'm just going to think about those 2 verses, and they're both true, and just decide which one is more true right now. And over the course of about 10 days, I was driving around the state in early 2023, and it's just Galatians feels more right for the moment than the Old Testament verse. And so that is kind of the way I do it. But it's also just about nature. Nature makes you feel humble. Nature teaches you're not on the apex predator. Nature teaches you that you're humble, and nature teaches you to be amazed and to be shocked. I use this phrase, joy shocks. When you're walking in a foggy day and everything is gray and kind of drizzly, and then you look down on a log and there's this fiery orange mushroom that probably sprouted out last night. It's shocking. when you are in the fall and the leaves are starting to fall, and the first ones that fall have to hit a lot of other leaves on the way down, and you just hear that click, 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 click. I mean, it's amazing. You know, I had some bear interactions. I had snakes and spiders and all this stuff, but it just teaches you that you're not the center of things. And I think that the you know, an important bit of, I mean, look, humility in politics, we want to be exceptional. American exceptionalism. We want America the indispensable nation. That's what we want to be in politics. But then the scripture says, he who exalts himself shall be humbled. He who humbles himself shall be exalted. So if it's true about a person, can it be untrue about a society or untrue about a country? Or should the same thing that is a virtue about a person be a virtue about a society or a country? So these are the kinds of things that sustain me. But I will say time in nature gives you the ability not to rush, because you need space in your life for thoughts to bubble up. Because, you know, I mean, I'm like probably everybody here. I mean, I'm too like, do this, do this, do this, run here, run there. You know, I got this phone call to make. And if you don't have the time between, then you don't have the ability for epiphanies and thoughts to bubble up, or ideas that you have in your head already but that have never connected to kind of connect together.
That's good. As we kind of close here, that I think something that plays into this optimism in the book and in your life in general is one of the themes of the book that I really love is that it's also really a book about friendship and family.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear you talk a little bit about, and you know, your wife is here, so say nice things, right? No, but I would love to hear you talk about like the role that family and friends, both kind of on the journey and generally, has played in your life, and moving forward, like how that's formed you, I guess. Yeah.
The hike was mostly solo, 42 days, 2/3 of it was solo. The bike trip was with a group of guys that I had done a bike trip with 25 years ago to see if we still have what it takes. And the canoe trip was, I'm in the back of the boat, and in the front of the boat, Ann's there with me 1/3 of the time, and my kids and my neighbors and tribal leaders whose tribes I've helped gain recognition in Virginia, and environmental activists who are teaching me about the James River and climate change. And so it is a story about friendship. And in particular, I have a law school friend outdoor group, and then I have a Richmond friend outdoor group, and they're together with Ann and the kids. These friend groups are with me. And yeah, I did think a lot about it. I mean, if any of you have ever read, the only book that I kind of thought of, if I could aspire to something in this book, what would it be, is a nature book about friendship. It's A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers by Thoreau. And for those of you who don't know the story, Thoreau and his brother John built their own boat. They're in Concord, Mass. It's an exploration of the faraway nearby. It's not a distant travel. They built the boat. They put it right in the Concord River, right where they live. They filled it up with stuff from their garden, watermelons, whatever. And they took a week-long trip down the Concord River to the confluence with the Merrimack, and then up the Merrimack into New Hampshire. And he kept a journal. And he didn't do anything with it for about 10 years. His brother died of tetanus. He went to Walden, and Walden is the work that he's known for. But what was he doing at Walden? He was writing up this story about his brother and the journey that they took. And it's really, if you read it, each segment is about the journey, but it's a meditation on friendship and an elegy to his brother John. And I kind of felt like in my book, I'm trying to do the same thing. I've had a lot of people who've adventured with me along the way. And, you know, I had a chance to think about like male friendship. I mean, I say this about my dad. My dad, Al, amazing guy, has a lot of friends. But the friends that he has are all friends that he and my mom have. And it's couple friends. I don't remember once in my life my dad ever going out and hanging out with a friend, except he and mom would go hang out with their friends. I don't remember him, you know, going to a bar, going to a baseball game, leaving the 3 rambunctious boys behind to hang out with a friend. And maybe that's not that uncommon, but I have been fortunate to be part of 2 really intense networks of friends, both of which I'm not the hub of the friendship. That in each of these 2 groups, there's a hub, and I'm spoke. But I have been able to, you know, be blessed with the ability to be part of these intentional friendships. And you talk about health, talk about ups and downs of marriage, talk about professional successes. When I was on the ticket and lost in 2016, the law school group was, we got to go on a vacation with you. We got to check and make sure you're going to be okay. And man, it's if you take that away from the book, that wow, the power of friendship, then something I hoped to communicate. I'm glad it did come through.
Yeah, so I think it's probably the soul of the book. I think is probably that friendship aspect that's really through the whole thing. But well, thank you so much for sharing.
Austin, thank you.
It's been a joy and a privilege working with you on the book.
Very
thank
much.
you all for coming. It's been a thrill. So
Great. Thank you. A great editor and a great writer. Get his novel. Is it Gloria Patri?
it is Gloria Patri.
Gloria
Yeah.
Patri.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
And to you, and to what Politics and Prose does in terms of